I have to get the dates right. 2018. Yeah, 2018, something privately happened, which gave me the opportunity to say, you know what, screw it. I resign. I need to get some fresh air. I've had a long love for the mountains, which is funny as a Dutch guy, right? That's full of concrete, full of people and below sea level, but I decided to like the mountains for whatever reason. By 2018, it was late in the season, and I've done this voluntary work for a Dutch organization, sister organization from the Swiss SLF, the premier avalanche forecasting and education company in Switzerland, teaching avalanche courses. The owner of the school, I get in contact with him, and he goes, "Yeah, so one of our guides, he broke his leg, so I'm kind of screwed for the season." So he was calling all of his guides who did like me 1 or 2 of the peak weeks. Could you do a whole season? And I'm like, of course not. I have a job and a girl and a house and a blah blah blah. And I spoke about it with one of my best friends the day after, and he was like, hang on, if a job you're not too excited about anymore, you don't have a girl, you don't have a house, why not go to the Alps for a season? It might do you good. Long story short, I called the guy to bet the next day, and I was like, all right, I'm in.
Welcome to the Founders Journey podcast. Inspiration, education for founders by founders. Welcome back to Founders Journey podcast with Peter Dean, my co-host here. Good to see you, Peter. Another week, another great interview.
Thanks for having me back again.
Every week, man. Every damn week.
I'm still here.
Keeps happening. That's right. Another great interview this week. Another great guest on the podcast. We have Jasper Polak with us, and I'll introduce Jasper. But good to see you, Jasper. Thanks for joining us on the Founders Journey podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. So know Jasper for probably just over a year or so now. Met originally through Twitter, where he's got an awesome following. We'll get into all that stuff. But Jasper, the best way I'd describe Jasper, tell me if I'm getting this right, Jasper, is a fractional COO who really works with direct-to-consumer businesses, some really cool stuff, a lot in the outdoor space and things like that to really build scale and generate cash while allowing them to move forward without taking on a bunch of additional investors and things like that. So really working with high growth direct-to-consumer businesses. As I mentioned, he's got a huge following on Twitter where he writes extensively about project management and execution in all size companies, and writes a really popular newsletter called The Project Leaders. I think that's a weekly, right?
Yep, weekly.
So he's originally from the Netherlands, and we're going to get into this part, but lives up in Norway now. So we'll get into how he ended up there. But Jasper, great to see you. Appreciate you joining us.
Happy to be here, man. Let's do it.
All right, let's get into it. So, let's just start. Yeah,
you're the host, so you're supposed to break the ice, but I'm going to do it on your behalf because 10 minutes before the show started, I asked you, is this video or audio? And you were like, tuxedo, man, dress up.
That's right.
I was totally expecting you to be in the tux, and Peter too, but it's all t-shirts here.
Peter and I do like to go black tie on these things. But today we made an exception. So
next time.
That's time. Right. I was hoping to get you to bite so you'd show up in a tux and then.
What is the outdoor industry tux? Like, this is it. This is the formal shirt for the outdoor industry right here.
I thought I would not wear a flannel for one day of the month, and I get crap for it.
maybe we go full monocle and everything with it. So it would be impressive, but didn't work out the way I had envisioned here. So anyway, Jasper, I sort of gave the intro. Tell us, what are you doing? How you got started? Just kind of give us the sort of the backstory to how you ended up a fractional COO working with companies on project management related and sort of broader execution COO related stuff.
Oh man, this is what, 30-minute podcast, 2-hour podcast? How far do you want me to go back?
We can go as long as you want. This is like Joe Rogan. We can go all day if you want to.
No,
we're like Joe Rogan without the listeners, by the way. So that's the one notable difference.
And without the weed, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I didn't say that. Maybe you guys are.
Hey, I'm
in Colorado.
Yeah. And I'm from the Netherlands.
That's right.
Long story short, I have a business school background, but kind of a barbell idea where the bachelor was in organizational behavior, which is really the people side of organizations, and a lot of very change management heavy, for example. And then on the other end, a minor in econometrics, like the hard, nerdy data stuff. Regular business master after that. Did some management consulting, first in boutique firms, then in larger firms, and quickly realized that I wasn't so good and also not so interested in drafting like the 10, 20, 30 year ahead, big strategy, big vision stuff, and also not super excited by making PowerPoint slides for 70 hours a week. So pretty quickly on, I moved internal with a client. That was a big international industrial firm, and they had a small internal team that was basically responsible for implementing whatever advice or ideas they got from consultants. So in a regular corporate idea, right? The board comes up with the next great idea. The CEO hires a consultant to see if it's actually a good idea. They come up with either don't or do, and in case of do, with an implementation idea. And then they had this internal team of consultants, project managers, however you want to call it, to implement this. And this was anything from a country entry to outsourcing logistics to a 3PL to consolidating a bunch of warehouses to process optimization, you name it. I enjoyed that a lot. That was great. Did that for almost 7 years. Yeah, something like that. And by the end of it, ran the corporate strategic transformation program towards 2020, which every company had 10 years ago, right? Everyone had a blah blah 2020 strategy, which had work streams anywhere from finance to international expansion, construction, purchasing, the whole shebang. So that's really where the execution idea comes from. And then in 2019, I have to get the dates right. 2018. Yeah, 2018, something privately happened, which gave me the opportunity to say, you know what, screw it. I resign. I need to get some fresh air. And I've I've had a long love for the mountains, which is funny as a Dutch guy, right? That's full of concrete, full of people, and below sea level. But I decided to like the mountains for whatever reason. So by 2018, it was late in the season, and I've done this voluntary work for organization, a Dutch organization, sister organization from the Swiss SLF, the premier avalanche forecasting and education company in Switzerland, teaching avalanche courses. And as I'm in the middle of this private kerfuffle that there's no point in getting into, but everything up in the air, basically. You have a chair and 4 legs, and if one's a little wobbly, it's fine. But if you kick all 4 underneath, you have a problem. The owner of the school, I get in contact with him, and he goes, "Yeah, so one of our guides, he broke his leg, so I'm kind of screwed through the season." So I'm calling everyone to see if
avalanche control. This is an avalanche education business. So you break your leg in this business, and you are in.
Yeah, you're toast. If you can't ski, you can't work.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
that's just the gist of it. So he was calling all of his guides who did like me 1 or 2 of the peak weeks. Could you do a whole season? And I'm like, of course not. I have a job and a girl and a house and a blah blah. And I spoke about it with one of my best friends the day after, and he was like, "Hang on, you have a job you're not too excited about anymore. You don't have a girl, you don't have a house. Why not go to the Alps for a season? It might do you good." Long story short, I called the guy to bet the next day, and I was like, "All right, I'm in." So there was a season in Switzerland. As I left, I told my parents, I'm just gonna, get some fresh air for a couple months, and we'll see what happens after that. I'll need to find a new job, but I need some time off, and I need a reset. And I knew deep inside, but I didn't tell my mom yet. That you gotta make this land softly. That the odds of that being in the Netherlands was not 100%. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, not a lot of, not like the avalanche industry, if there is such a thing in Netherlands, is nascent at best, I think.
No, non-existent. But I was hoping that there would be a way to combine what I like to do outside of work with what I'm good at and what people are also willing and able to pay for, which is those two not necessarily go in hand, right? So over that winter, I didn't really put too much time in it, but I was talking to a few friends, and then somewhere in March or April, I think, a friend from Norway reached out that I knew almost 20 years by now, who co-founded a company in Norway that makes ski equipment, basically helmets, protective gear, clothing, stuff like that. They'd just been bought by private equity group. And one of the or a piece of the deal was like, hey, if you guys want to play big company games now. You need to grow up. So that meant hiring an operations manager, CEO there. So he literally said that the profile they were looking for was the sweet spot between a ski bum and a jerk in a suit. And he didn't even know I didn't have a job at the time, but he was like,
You're just straight ski bum at the time.
Yeah, exactly. So that escalated pretty quickly. I had a few calls with them. I got on a flight from Switzerland to Oslo and then rang my mom. And I was like, so yeah, you think I'm in Zurich, but actually I'm in Oslo and I just signed a 1-year contract to work here.
That's awesome.
And that snowballed. I've now been in Norway for almost 5 years. I ended up working for the parent company behind that. And we can go into all of that, but this was already a 6-minute rant, so please interrupt.
No.
Yeah.
That's a great lead in to how you ended up in Norway, which is definitely part of the questions we want to ask. Go ahead, Peter. Sorry, I think I interrupted you there.
I just want to pull it back to the skiing again. Sorry, Greg.
We've at some point during this interview, we actually have to get to what Jasper does, but yeah, the skiing part is.
I'm going to weave it in. I'm going to start with that. I'll start with that. I raced in college, alpine skiing in college. So in New York State. So, it's not, we have mountains here, not like Colorado, but, and then I spent 10 years in California skiing out there. So that was a lot of fun, but, it's interesting. You talked about like not missing a powder day and then starting your company. Like, how do you integrate those two things together? Because I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's really hard to balance like outdoor lifestyle with, being an entrepreneur.
Sure it is, but it's also a choice, right? You're a few years ahead of where we left off. I left the private equity group officially this spring, actually. Started for myself last fall with the goal of, like you say, never missing a powder day. I'm not here to build the next unicorn. I'm also not really into the solopreneur or into the lifestyle business kind of, like, I didn't get completely sucked up in the Tim Ferriss books from 15 years ago. But I think there's a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. And if you are a skier and you live close to the mountains, and you'll know and you'll appreciate that powder days are rare, especially here where it can rain as well, even in February, close to the coast. So if it's good, and I'm going. Like, it's once you've made that choice, then everything else just has to move on days like that.
Well, it's I think it's a really important concept, right? That, you got into. I mean, you started this business very much around a desire for a specific lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that, I've always appreciated about your story, Jasper, is the reasons you started were super clear, right? These were not, like you just said, I mean, I'm not trying to build the next unicorn. I'm not trying to go out and create this monster company. I'm trying to create this company that really, drives a lot of value in organizations, but also supports my lifestyle, right? And I think that's something that I think a lot of entrepreneurs, I know I've struggled with this. I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs will really struggle with is kind of that why behind what they're doing, right? Because there is always, I think, that impetus to say, hey, if I'm doing this, I got to go big. And going big, I think, has a lot of different definitions, right? And it's a very personal definition to people. I mean, is that, is that something that you've ever struggled with? Is that just basically, you just knew, like, this is what I'm going to go try to do?
I think that I have the competitive athletics background, and if you've done a few weeks in management consulting, you know that those two go hand in hand. But it also means a little bit of elbows, right? People get their elbows out, and it's up or out. And I could sure have gotten sucked up in that for 20 more years. But at some point, I realized that I was getting sucked into it. And I think I'm very happy that I realized that at late 20s instead of late 40s.
Yeah.
And so the thing that's actually a really interesting difference coming from the Netherlands to Norway. In the Netherlands and most other Western European countries, if you meet someone like, hey, Greg, I meet you at, a friend of a friend or whatever, and I'll ask, who are you? What do you do? And one of the first things you'll probably say is, what do you do for a living? What kind of company you run,
Right.
etc. Whereas here in Norway, I still feel like if I would have met you at a friend of a friend's birthday, you could tell me about your kids and where you grow up and that you like to ski and what mountain bike you have and yada, yada, yada. And 3 hours
Right.
later, you leave and the guy sitting next to us says, oh, by the way, he's the CEO of the local bank.
Right.
So
Right.
the role that a job plays in, I would almost say, society or in people's lives is a lot less significant than what I'm used to. And I think that really shook me up a little bit. So there's this concept, right, that you have to find this overlap of what you're good at and what you enjoy and what people are willing and able to pay for and how you can contribute. And well, you can make it as complicated as you want, but it all drives back to what you said, which is purpose. And for me, that is partially what you said earlier, Peter, to not miss a powder day. But there's also the summer equivalent of a powder day, right? It's just, it doesn't even, I could even miss a powder day as long as it's for the right reasons. It's just
Right.
it's a constant reminder to myself to not get sucked up in that hamster wheel again and make certain choices because of it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's hard to do. It's hard to
Sure is.
balance that because
Sure is.
as as an athlete, you're very competitive, and you're competitive kind of probably in everything you do. I mean, if you're someone from the Netherlands that's at the level where you can teach AVI security safety course, you had to be pretty aggressive in, kind of getting to know that from that place to be able to
Hmm.
actually ski at that level. And that's not a simple thing to do. I, you
Yeah.
know, I know we're going back. If I asked you, like, how did you do that? Like, how did you go as someone who there's no opportunity for you really where you live to do that, to go on Alpine, you know, how did you do that?
I think the Netherlands is what, 1,000 km from the Alps, 600 miles. So if you're fortunate enough, which I was, to grow up in a middle class family where my parents both really loved the mountains, we would go on a ski holiday once a year. So my first time skiing was when I was, able to stand up, 3, and of course, it was completely meaningless and down a little hill in the parking lot next to the apartment where my parents were skiing and my grandparents were babysitting, basically. But it planted a seed for sure. That's just 1 week of skiing a year. That won't get you anywhere, right? We all know
Yeah,
that.
I was gonna say
Um,
that's not that much.
the uh, the interesting plot twist is I actually didn't ski much for a couple of years in between because I got really competitive in kayaking. And Greg know this, you don't, but I did that on a high level, and I did a bunch of expeditions around the world. And what that teaches you is if you're in the middle of bleep nowhere in a country where you can't call a helicopter because there's not even cell reception or whatever, you learn to deal with your own crap. And you learn a lot about team dynamics, you learn a lot about risk management, etc. So once I had a bunch of injuries and surgeries, and at some point there's this doc who wakes me up in hospital and he literally goes, well, there's nothing a couple screws can fix, but it's time for a new sport, buddy. And that was my cue to replace kayaking with skiing again. And 90% of what you learn in any kind of outdoor sport is it's just like business, right? What works in fintech is not the same as what works in e-commerce, but there's a lot of parallels. So
Yeah.
how you deal with risk, how you deal with teams, how you make your assessments, how you deal with
Mhm.
situations after it's gone wrong, how you make sure it doesn't go wrong in the first place. All those things, there are 1,000 parallels. So I picked up skiing after I kind of retired from competing, because if you train all winter and you then break your wrist on a 6-day family holiday in April, that's not a very popular move. Let's put it that way. Picked up skiing again, and there's two different components to it. It's learning it, and there's the That's just from enthusiasm and loving the mountains and having friends who are good at it and spending a lot of time in a car up and down the Autobahn for long weekends from the Netherlands. The actual trigger to get into teaching it is a sad story. I lost one of my best friends to an avalanche in 2016. And after that, I was terrified of skiing. And I realized that I had to get over that because I was terrified of it, but I also really enjoy it. So it's like
Mhm.
it's this devil angel on either shoulder, right? And I'd done 2010 or whatever. I'd done an entry level avalanche course through this same company, and I had a friend that could connect me to the owner. So I reached out to the owner after that, and I said, "Hey, this is the story. I think that doing an advanced course might help me get over this." Because I'm the kind of guy that, knowledge is power for me. It helps me process.
Mhm.
He was like, yeah, sure, come and do an advanced course. And it's good to know the backstory behind it. So that, like, if you hit a wall, just pull my jacket. Um, I didn't hit a wall. I really enjoyed it. And I had a lot to talk about with him and also all the other guides about what I'd done in kayaking and other expeditions. There was a lot of connections. So one thing led to the other, and I after the course was like, so okay, what's next after an advanced course? They were like, well, not so much, maybe instructor training, and kind of that's how it went. Um, but
That's
it's
cool.
it's crazy, right? There's this group of guides that live in Switzerland and Austria, and then there's a handful of instructors that don't live there full time. I'm now no longer one of them because I also live in the mountains, but in Norway.
Yeah, it's very similar down here in Colorado, right? It's very much this little kind of cottage community that's here, but it's just such an important as the father of a pretty out of control skier who spends an enormous time up in the middle of absolutely nowhere on multi-day backcountry trips and things like that. I mean, that work is it's just so important. It really is. So, all right. So I got to pivot. This is awesome. We can talk about this.
This is
We
not a
told you
It
skiing
before
is.
we
podcast,
started.
though.
This
You,
is the
you
way it's
got
going
your
to
20
go.
minutes, Peter.
We,
This is how
we,
you related it to business, which is super important because all the things you said set up kind of all the things you do.
well,
True that.
absolutely. And it's just really funny. I think one of the common themes, like it just seems like whenever we do these podcasts, one of the common themes is it just seems like 90% of the people we talk to, there's always this sort of connection to this kind of this outdoor connection, right? That's really powerful. But so I know in a lot of your writing, Jasper, and what you're doing, I mean, you talk a lot about practical project management. I know our audience for this
Mm-hmm.
podcast is startup founders, right? This is I think a really important concept, especially in a startup world when you're dealing with high growth startups and things like that. How did that concept really evolve for you? Where and because I know it is a kind of an ever evolving thing. And what kind of advice would you give, founders of high growth startups around this sort of concept of practical project management?
I would start off by saying that I'm not a 0 to 1 guy. I'm a 1 to
Mhm.
10 guy. I'm also not a 10 to 100 guy. So it's really this growth and early scaling phase, but way
Yep.
before maturity and after product market fit. I think, but I'm not an expert at this, product market fit before that is just, put on your blinders and get it done. And from the moment where, yeah, I'd almost say formal, but between air quotes, project management makes sense, is when you build a team of 10, 15 people or something like that, and you have different activities going on. This may differ between business models, industries, etc., but I have to be super generic here. Where the practical piece came from is just the sheer frustration that everything out there about project management that's written about project management, whether it's a book or a course or whatsoever, it's tailored for the Googles and the Microsofts of the world.
Right.
It's paper pushing. And to a very large extent, most of that is needed in a large hierarchical and slightly bureaucratic organization. But it's very unhelpful if you're 20 people in a WeWork trying to get crap done. at the speed where you're running laps around the companies that need all these policies.
Right.
So the theory and academia is a great source of inspiration, but it won't help you get stuff done. It's too slow for that.
Yeah. So what are the biggest, I mean, if you think about it, like when you think about startups, right, that are in that growth phase, like you said, sort of post, because that product market fit stage is just that's a hard one, right? I mean, you're doing a lot of stuff to just get something to click. But then there's this moment, right, where it's like, okay, we figured out who can buy this product. We figured out where this message resonates. They
Hmm.
seem to want to continue to buy the product or buy more. At that stage, when you're starting to go from that, kind of maybe 5 co-founder thing up to, 20 employees. I mean, what are the break points you typically see where founders are, where they really start to struggle with kind
Hmm.
of broadly execution, right?
Yeah. There's a really obvious one that comes to mind. I think at the beginning, when after you hit this product market fit, you can grow your company and you can grow really fast, but it's still kind of linear by you've now figured out something that works, right?
Right.
You can grow by doing more of what you know works and doing it better, but you're going to
Hmm.
hit a ceiling at some point. And that's when you need
Yep.
to start talking about scaling. And scaling can be a different segment, different channel, different customer, different product, etc. But in the beginning, just do more and do it better will get you a long way. And when you flip that switch into just do more and better, there's usually a first tipping point around 10, 12 people. Amazon popularized this a decade ago or something. They called it the two pizza teams. So they said
Right.
that all their teams should be small enough so that you it can feed them with two king size pizzas. And what I see a lot in companies that are 10, 12, maybe 15 people, they're still too reliant on the founder. So they figured out by then that there is a need for documentation. So they go to Notion or they go to Google Docs or whatever. They start writing stuff down. That's awesome.
Hmm.
They then figure out that there's a need for communication because, especially in the remote world, but even if you're local, you can't all sit around the same table anymore. You're past that point. But what they don't realize is that there's something in the middle, coordination. So
Hmm.
they become the bottleneck because they are the one that's connecting the dots between what people talk to and what's been written down. So this is the plan, this is the reality, and they become the coordinator. And
Yep.
with that, they make themselves the bottleneck. And I think that is the first kind of that's where you need to start thinking about operations or project management or whatever label you want to put upon it. You need to separate documentation, communication, and coordination and put
Yep.
some form of process in place for that.
That is just an awesome way, I think, of talking about it, because you see it, yeah, I kind of come out of the startup and venture world, and yeah, I see it in almost every portfolio company, right? Everybody runs into that same wall. And the way you just articulated that, I think, is just a brilliant way to say it is, it starts with the documentation, but where it hits that wall is that bottleneck stage, right? It's the founder becomes the problem. And, it's never intentional. It's never something that they're even realizing that they're doing, but getting out of their own way is that, and it comes at different points, right? I mean, I've seen it at 2 million, I've seen it at 5 million, 10 million, 20 million.
Sure.
Some manage to make it longer than others, but that's that critical moment where a founder becomes the CEO
Yeah.
or
And that's
doesn't.
also, sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said, or they don't, right? And that's that juncture.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where you basically have your first scaling issue as a company. That's where you
Right.
realize that you're no longer a cowboy club where on Friday you order pizza and beer and figure out what you do next week. That suffices up to 10, 12, 20 best case.
Yeah.
But now you realize that you need to start organizing stuff. You need to start thinking about org structure. And when you say that to a founder with 15 friends, they roll their eyes and they go, no, that's for Google. But
Right.
this is where it starts. And what you see there is there's often three different directions that we take these in conversations with founders. You can the first, the logical option is to find a generalist. Like a little Greg or a little Peter. What they're basically looking for is a unicorn with 17 legs. They rarely exist because they think that if they find someone with the same profile and the same skill set as they are, they can do a little bit of everything.
Mm-hmm.
But that's more of a role that's almost a COO. That's almost an operator or a chief of staff. If you
Right.
frame it as a chief of staff, I think it makes sense. But then at a slightly larger scale, the second option people have is specialize and hire vertically. So in case of a podcasting business, get an editor, get a video editor, get a thumbnail guy, get a this, get a that. And the third one is to scale horizontally. So get someone for every 5 podcasts you run, or get someone to run for every 5 new accounts that you onboard, or for every new product feature that you make, or whatever you need to do to make it fit your business model. But that's one of the very first structural choices that you have to make as founder. One is, how am I going to scale this business? And 2 is, what role am I going to play in it? And those are 2 questions that are completely derived from the question of, what are we actually building here?
Yeah.
Why are we doing this? Where are we going?
Yeah.
And how are we going to get there? And that's usually where all these conversations come back to. People come to me all the time with tactical questions on project management and operations, and they're like in the nitty-gritty detail. And if you don't know where you're headed and roughly how you're getting there, let's start with that, because the clearer you have that, and the clearer everyone is rowing in the same direction, the fewer questions you actually need to answer, because it's obvious. If everyone knows we're going right, no one will ask you about this shiny object on the left.
You tweeted today about the shiny object syndrome. And I know that, especially if a founder maybe makes it through that, and now they're really a CEO, they have a little more time than they did because someone's running this part, someone's running this part. If they really gave faith into them and let them kind of do it, then do they start chasing shiny objects, or how do you stay on course?
I think that comes down, that's one level below the question I asked earlier, like, what are you really
Yeah.
building?
Mm-hmm.
Below that, if you know where you're headed, and whether you frame that in a value and in a mission statement or North Star, I don't really care about the framework. I'm very framework agnostic. Same in project management. If you want to go agile, knock yourself out. If you're going to waterfall, fine by me. There's a bunch of first principles underneath it, and they are met as long as you answer a couple questions that allow you to implement. Underneath those first tier questions is something that most would call strategy. Strategy is basically just a set of choices, and strategy acts as a filter. So the clearer your strategy is, the clearer the filter is. And the clearer you are on strategy, and the better you're able to use it as a filter, the less likely you are to chase shiny objects. And this very much depends on the founder or co-founder profile as well. People ask often, like, how does the perfect leadership team look? I don't know. I don't care, because it largely depends on the personality of the founder or co-founders. If you are a person with a new idea every day, and you are very commercial, very extrovert, very outgoing, then you might need a COO earlier than the very technical founder that struggles to sell. There's no right or wrong answer here. It's this hatred. It depends. But I think that if you set up a leadership team or a management team that covers each other's weaknesses, covers each other's blind spots, and you're clear on the direction, so you can use your strategy as a filter for what to say yes to, but way more importantly, what to say no to, that's how you can stop yourself from chasing shiny objects. But it's hard, man. Like I say this probably on Twitter more than I should. Shiny objects kill more businesses than a lack of ideas does. Everyone has ideas.
Absolutely. That was your tweet, and it's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. I've been down those roads. I know Greg has been down those roads. I was down those roads with Greg a couple times.
I don't know. I don't get distracted. Peter distracts me. So any distraction
I've been
have
there
is
too.
usually...
Don't worry.
It's this great idea, and you're like, what does that have to do with what you're doing now?
I want to be a fly fishing
You need some
guy,
help
man.
from people. You definitely need some help from people.
It is.
That's really interesting.
It's a brutally difficult thing, right? Because I think in a lot of founders, and I've seen this so many times, right? Founders will have this. There's this kind of mindset that says, "I got this business to where it is, so what I actually need to do is go find 5 more people like me, and we'll be 5 times better."
Yeah.
And breaking that mindset is a really, really difficult thing to do, where you actually like that behavioral model of a founder is so unique, right? And especially when you're dealing with like growth companies, venture backed companies, things like that. That model of the founder is so unique, and the personality is so unique. You go find 5 more people just like you're going to have 5 fires that you didn't have starting,
Yeah.
because that's what founders do, right? We create fires. Sometimes they light engines, right? And the plane takes off. Sometimes they just set the plane on fire. And,
Yeah.
but it's that same personality, that same set of behavioral characteristics. It's a tough thing for, I think, every founder struggles with this concept, right? We're not executing the way we want to. And you're at that sort of plateau. You can't break it. And it's very counterintuitive to say, I need to go out and find a bunch of people completely unlike me.
Yeah.
Right? To go do things that feel very corporate.
Yeah, because if you find 5 more people like you during your early stage, then you've just given away 10-20% of your company to start civil war. It's it's a terrible idea. But
yeah, no, it's bad.
the earlier you understand as founder that what got you from 0 to 1 won't get you from 1 to 10 and won't get you from 10 to 100, the faster you'll go and the bigger you'll grow, because
Right.
it's inevitable. You will become the bottleneck at some point.
Yeah.
And you just have to figure out when that is and how to mitigate it. And the founders I have most respect for are the founders who at some point realize that they are the bottleneck and they can't solve that. So therefore they step back.
That's right.
The founder that goes at some point from CEO to saying, you know what, I really just love product. So I'm now going to hire a CEO. I'm going to report to that person while I stay on the board, and I'm going to be product officer. I have an incredible amount of respect for that. That takes guts.
It's a hard transition. I could tell you that. I mean, speaking from experience, where, Peter and I have both been there, right? Where we've built businesses that at some point we've kind of had to say, I'm not the guy to lead this anymore, and it's a hard thing. I mean, it requires, I think, a level of self-awareness, but it requires that, requires a kind of a confidence to say, I can figure out something else to do with my time, but this business is not getting beyond me. And I think for different founders, like we said, it happens at different stages. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with this, right? And I think when we talk about the founder's journey, right? We named this podcast The Founder's Journey. We talk about the founder's journey. It's because it's just that, like, it's a moment, right? When you're starting this thing, and you're going to get it to a certain point, and having that understanding of what is that point that you are most comfortable. You said this just a couple of minutes ago. I'm not the 0 to 1 guy, and I'm not the 10 to 50 guy. I think you said, or I think I just got those wrong, the numbers wrong, but
you're good.
But it's understanding where it is, like where is my place in this? Where can do my skills allow me to execute better than anybody else? Because once you reach the top end of that, it's trouble. And it also works the other way, right? I mean, it also works where you hire you see startups do this all the time. You hire large company people that come into a startup, and it's like, where's my, where's where's that? It's like, no, dude, we don't have any of that stuff. Like, none of it, right? Like,
I'll never forget this. I was involved in a preparation of a board meeting with a scale up, and they just brought on a CEO from, like you say, a public large company, and this guy was, the going to take the company to the promised land. And he's prepping his first board meeting, and he looks at me and 3 others around the table, and he says, yeah, okay, then we agree on what we're going to tell them. So who's going to make the slides? And we all go, that'll be you, buddy. And he
have
was
you
like, wait, what?
have you ever actually used PowerPoint? Do
Yeah.
you know?
Push the
And
buttons.
this
Yeah,
same guy, we had to explain to this same guy how Outlook worked because he hadn't managed his own calendar in 15 years. It's like,
right.
you
Yeah,
don't have an army of 30 people here to do this for you. This is
yeah,
like,
Yeah.
roll up your sleeves. You're in the scale up world. This wasn't a startup anymore, but this was scale up world. And
yeah.
it's very different from global corporations. I'm
Totally, and
trying
that's
really
what I
hard
love
not to drop
about.
names.
Absolutely.
And that's what I love about that concept of practical project management, right? It's not about it's look, who cares? I don't care if you use Asana or a Monday or whatever. It's about the talent that sits around the table and their ability, right? And I think that's so much of what you write about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really important for me because like I said earlier, whatever method you choose, people ask it all the time, what's the best method? The best method is the one that fits the context. And the context is the project within the organization.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter if I prefer framework A, B, or C. It needs to fit your context. But what doesn't change with whichever framework or methodology you choose is a bunch of first principles. We're always dealing with, why are we doing this? What are we building? Who do we have involved, both on team and as stakeholders? What are the boundaries? Where are we doing it? By how are we going to execute upon? Like there's this the 6 W's, and then there's a bunch of constraints and some stakeholders and some communication. Let's not make it more complicated than that. For 95% of project management, that's all you need. So if
Yeah.
you understand those fundamentals and you then turn that into a plan, and then a plan, I think people take this way too serious. People build these Gantt charts and these. I'm known for bashing Gantt charts a little bit, but it's for this exact reason. I have nothing against the concept of a Gantt chart if it happens to be the right tool for the job. But what I have everything against is the pedestal that those things are placed upon. The
Right.
moment you press save, it's outdated. And we all know it. We're just not, we don't want to say it. So
Right.
this whole concept of planning, I think that's where the power is. It's in the homework you do, it's in the analysis, the conversations, the trade-offs. And a plan it's just a way of storing those conversations. And once you have this rough direction, and that is also something that I think a lot of scale ups get wrong. They're like, okay, now we have to, play business, which means we need to know what we're going to do in the second week of November of 2027. No, plan a quarter ahead, or if you're earlier, plan a month ahead for all I care. Know where you're headed, whether that's 5 or 10 or 20 years ahead, and know your next few steps, and then just execute, because you'll learn so much more from executing the next step than you'll ever learn from a month of analysis. So get
Right.
this rough direction right. Do your risk management, of course. Make sure that you involve the right stakeholders. Get your basics right. But beyond those basics, just get going, and you'll
Yeah.
get good from get going, then get good.
Yeah.
It's not this analysis paralysis. It's terrible. Um, Past that first plan, it's and we've had a lot of conversation about this in the past, Greg. It's all
Mhm.
about team.
Yep.
Yeah,
Totally.
I'll take a good team with a mediocre plan any day over a mediocre team with the best plan in the world. It's just not going to happen.
No doubt about it. No
So
doubt.
that's the two things I hammer on all the time is keep it simple, keep it practical, bring it down to first principles. And once you have those basics, those fundamentals in place, project management is just leadership, man.
Yep.
With the added complexity that especially the larger the organization get, the more revolving and rotating people are. I hate calling them resources. Resources is money. It's people. And
Yep.
and you need the right people for the job. And that also means that quite often people stay on a project for a week, a month, 3 months, but then they leave again. So that means that you can't rely on culture
Right.
because people come and go. So that means you have to make all these small things that in a larger organization you can lean upon. You can lean upon it because the culture will take care of it. People know what the way is we do things here. So that means that you need to make a lot of stuff that is normally implied. You now need to make that explicit. So it's all just leadership, taking people along in your change story, getting the right people on board, getting rid of the people who did a great job but are no longer necessary, keeping that team lean, figuring out the next step and the next step and the next step, and just keep it going from there. Constantly managing expectations, making the implicit explicit, not the other way around. And I think that's where project management. One of the things I think it's in the tagline or something of the newsletter is you manage work, but you lead people. And I think that we've gone a little too far in most project management where we try to manage people as well. People are more than just a number in a spreadsheet. There's a person behind it. And the moment the project manager realizes that, they're ahead of 90% of the pack.
Yep.
So that is something I try to bring up in almost every conversation. There's so much power in that. Get a basic plan in place, and from there on, lead the team. You'll get there.
So I have a question. I work in the same space you do, actually, in that same growth mode and scaling. How do you identify the situation of a company and kind of do the assessment of where they're at? Because you talked about probably managing people and really overly engineered planning, and then also maybe the founder that's trying to do everything and it's not really organized very well, or they're not making anything explicit. How do you find out where they're at in that process?
I think what you sketch are two completely different situations. One is a strict execution problem, and there at the situation we discussed earlier, where it's basically over engineered. That's what you
Yeah.
brought up earlier, Greg.
Right.
That's what happens if you get your CTO with 3 IPOs under his belt into a 15-man startup.
Right.
That's usually not too hard to identify. Join a couple calls and you'll get a feel for the dynamic. Ask for the documentation and someone will send over a 9 gigabyte Google Drive. I was like, you're 4 people, right? What's in there? I'm not even going to read it. What's in there?
Right.
Yeah.
And the other one is, if I come in to help a founder get on top of their operations, one of the first questions I always ask is, what are you building here? Where are you headed? And the ones that can give me a very clear answer, it's not many of them, but they're there. If they can give me a clear answer, then they're usually able themselves to tell me, all right, what's on fire? What's the bottleneck? Mm-hmm. And the ones who are unable to tell me what their direction is, that is just, we just identified the bottleneck.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I always start with that bigger picture, because like I said earlier, the clearer that is, and the more people are all rowing in the same direction, you just made half of your inbound questions redundant. It's no longer necessary.
Yeah.
So we get that in place, and from there, there's usually 2 or 3 lead dominoes that we can identify. If we knock those over, 40 other things on your desk have just either answered themselves or are no longer relevant.
Yeah.
So it's this constant, that's the consultant, the problem solver in me. Like, what is the next lead domino? What is the dial with the least effort and the largest leverage that we can turn?
You talk about first principles, right? I mean, it's really as simple as, what are we creating? Who are we creating it for? How are we creating it, right? I mean, it's really, I mean, I know there's more to it than that, but I mean, if you can start with those questions and have a real clarity around the answers to those questions, it's amazing, right? I mean, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of most other startups that they're just doing stuff, right? Where that direction, it just turns into sort of random noise all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that in the scaling phase, that's also a really interesting phenomena. So a founder comes to me with, and they have they run projects. Okay, great. And they run their operations. So they're building something, and on the side, they have about 50 projects going on. And then we dig into their strategy a little bit over a couple sessions. All right, this is where you're headed, and these are the goals, and these are the strategic pillars you're building that upon. Now let's relate all the stuff you're doing to these couple strategic pillars. Turns out 35 of 40 can be tied back to strategy, aka busy work.
Yep.
So you come home at the end of the day, you work your butt off for 9 hours, but the alignment is missing. So it's this, I always draw this triangle, right? From 30-year or 10-year or whatever you choose goal, all the way down from 10-year to 1 year, the quarter, down to the individual, or in larger organizations on team level. What are they working on next week? And how does that contribute to your monthly numbers, your quarterly OKRs, your annual goals? How does that, and the clearer that information flow is, top to bottom, but also bottom back to top, the more people are rowing in the same direction, and the more this flywheel picks up speed. It's
That's right.
just, yeah, once you've seen it in action a couple times, it's one of those teams where you come in and you're like, hey, crap, there's half of it here it's just clicking, it's working.
Right.
And it's, people have to experience that before they realize that it's actually possible. Like, work doesn't have to suck.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, it's a great way to, that's a great way to wrap this up. I think, you know, it's one of those things, if you've ever been on a great team, we all know what it feels like to be on a shitty team. But if you've ever been on a great team, you understand the palpable difference between those two. And that's experience, it's talent. And it's also just sometimes just stumbling into it, right? And being on a team where you can really experience that kind of alignment for the first time. It's an incredibly powerful thing. This is awesome, Jasper. I know you've got a huge Twitter following. You got the newsletter. How do people engage with you? How do they reach you if they are looking for some help around operations and execution in their business? How do people get in touch with you?
Twitter's the place to be, man. I'm very active there. That's how we connect in the first place, Greg, and how I meet a lot of people on a daily basis. So at Polak Jasper, I think, because the other way around was already taken by someone I've never met. And I don't have 100 million to burn on the X handle or something like that. But if you just look up my name, Jasper Polak, there's not a lot of them. I'm not called Ben Smith, so that helps.
We'll put it in the show notes too. So
sure.
So there'll be a link there as well.
Twitter's the place to be, both for DMs and for more content.
Got it. Yeah. So Jasper is definitely a must follow on topics around the stuff. If you know, in the startup world, the execution world, the founder world, definitely a must follow. Subscribe to the newsletter. I think you could do it right there, right through, like they'll find the path to get on your newsletter.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, Twitter leads to anything else you'll ever want to get involved in.
Yep. Perfect. Well, this is awesome, man. It's you know, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a year now. This is great. You know, I'm not only you know, do I consider you a friend, but I'm a huge fan as well. So I think this is really good stuff, and really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me, man. Next time here in person, we go skiing.
Absolutely.
I told you, October. I'm working on it. So
it's a little early, but we can try.
Well, ski, hike, ride. So there'll be some. The only thing I'm not doing is kayaking, but it sounds like you can't do it anyway. So we'll find some other ridiculous thing to nearly get ourselves killed, I'm sure.
We'll give it a try. All right. Thank you very much for your time, gents. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jasper.